this. Really appreciate it. Yeah, grazing sheep on sacred ground. What the heck does that mean? Well, let me give you a little backstory first. So my name's Aaron Steele. I farm with a guy named Chad Steenhook, and way back in 2012, he and I were raising meat goats on a really small scale, and we started this company, Goats on the Go. This is not meant to be a Goats on the Go commercial, but it's kind of important to our history. We started using our goats for weed and brush control for customers, so commercial targeted grazing. We take our goats to their properties, we eat their problem vegetation, they pay us, and we got into that business. Hey, thinking this is our route, this is our path out of just like unprofitable small scale hobby farms. This is going to be the thing that allows us to grow our farms and produce really good food for people. That was really our main intent. But Goats on the Go kind of took on a life of its own, and it grew really fast. And we were trying to meet demand, and we were keeping goats well past when they should have been marketed just to meet the demand for our targeted grazing operation. And in fact, we had lots of other people contacting us saying, how do I start a business like yours? And that kind of morphed into its own business enterprise of training and licensing our brand to people all over the country to start their own goat grazing businesses. And at some point, we stopped and looked at each other and said, do you feel like we're farming? I don't feel like we're farming. I mean, it's really nice, and we've been able to grow our goat herd quite a bit, but all of our energy is really being put to this targeted grazing operation, and I don't feel like we've really expanded our farm. And so we started looking for pastures to rent that would allow us to get into sheep. So we had kind of dabbled with Katahdin sheep, and we loved it. We saw a lot of potential there, but we just didn't have the pasture acres. I mean, we started Goats on the Go because we didn't have any land, we didn't have any facilities, we didn't have any equipment. But with Goats on the Go, we were able to raise more meat goats by feeding them on other people's properties. We got a little extra cash flow from that also, which helped us grow our herd a little bit faster because we could keep some of our animals to expand our herd, and we didn't need to sell every single one of them just to keep things going. But yeah, we had no place to grow from there. We wanted to expand into a Katahdin sheep operation, but we didn't have pasture. So what do we do about that? We also saw a lot of opportunity with a different type of targeted grazing that we were different from the targeted grazing we were doing with goats. This would be sheep grazing on solar sites. So solar grazing, we saw a lot of opportunity for that, but we didn't have the sheep for that. And so how do we get our foot in the door in that market and until we have sheep? And how do we have sheep if we don't have pasture? We couldn't find much pasture. If you look outside my window right now, I'm sitting in the back bedroom office of my house. And if you look north, you see corn and beans. If you look south, you see corn and beans. Every direction you look, corn and beans. And not a lot of pasture near us, and a lot of competition for the handful of pasture acres that are out there. And then those pasture acres tend to be like river bottom, really, Iowa pastures. If you can't put it in corn and beans, I guess it's pasture. And so they're not terribly productive anyway, and they come with their own challenges. So we came up with this theory that if we could access some land to lease that had been in row crop and converted it to pasture, all the extra benefits, including the extra forage that we might be able to produce on better land, would pay for itself if we did things right. So we could take what is in Iowa sacred ground, that is, any ground you could be planting corn on, and convert it to pasture. And that was a bit of a hard sell at first. You've got to find the right property owners who are willing to take this journey with you to convert sacred ground to pasture, to put pasture maggots on, as many people call sheep. So we fortunately did identify a couple of property owners, and in 2022, Chad and I formed On the Go Farms as kind of a spinoff of Goats on the Go to kind of be our agricultural operation and to test this theory that we could use row crop in pasture form and do well with it. So here was our plan. 100% leased land. We would have to pay row crop lease rates. Nobody's going to give us much of a break just because we want to run sheep on their sacred ground. So we would have to make it work at whatever rate a row crop tenant would pay, and we were going to convert that land to perennial pasture. We wanted to take on no debt, at least if we're going to take on debt, only debt to ourselves, and the money we would put into it ourselves. We didn't want any government grants, any kind of cost share, anything like that. There's a long story behind that, and we have a philosophy behind that. But that philosophy primarily, like the important part of that philosophy is just that we are always learning and innovating and trying to move quickly. And anytime you take money from somebody, you make them part of your plan. They get a say. And we wanted to stay light on our feet as much as possible. So no cost shares, no grants, no loans. 5 ewes per acre is what we were shooting for. We wanted to maximize the number of days on pasture, even in winter, and do as little winter feeding in sort of a dry lot or feedlot environment as possible. We didn't have much equipment, and we had started to see the benefit of not owning much equipment and having very little overhead. So we wanted to continue that approach of just minimizing our equipment needs, which meant we knew we would be hiring services done for us. But that was kind of part of the light-footed approach we wanted to take. We wanted to stay nimble, not be bogged down or cornered into any given practice by the equipment we'd already purchased or the facilities we'd built or the overhead that was forcing us in a particular direction. We wanted to use regenerative practices to the greatest extent practical to improve the soil and forage production, but also with small ruminants, we're worried about managing parasites. So those regenerative practices that we went into this thinking we would use is really highly managed, intensive rotational grazing with a plan. Probably stockpiling as much forage as we could going into the winter so that we could continue grazing standing forage as long as possible. And also winter bale grazing. And some of you may be familiar with that, some may not. I mean, essentially what we're talking about there is pre-setting bales strategically out on the land, big round bales primarily, to be grazed by sheep all through the winter. No bale rings, no feeders, just freestanding bales. That deposits a bunch of organic matter in a targeted place in an intense way, concentrates all the manure and urine from the animals during the winter, and we can have that happen on the low productivity parts of our pasture. So that was the plan.
Can I ask a quick question, Aaron?
Yeah, go ahead.
And I know you talked about this, and so maybe you'll talk about it again. But what what is the terms of your lease agreements?
Yep.
With
So the first lease we took on was a 5-year lease, and then a couple of years ago we took on a 10-year lease. Yeah, and we'll talk
is
a
that
little
a
bit.
rolling lease or
Um, we it is a fixed lease.
okay?
We have no provision for like an automatic renewal of either of those leases,
Okay,
but we do have really good landlords so
sure,
that want to take this journey with us.
awesome.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that here in a bit. Our sheep are 100% Katahdin hair sheep, unregistered, but 100%. We started out with about 200 exposed ewes, so not scanned, but presumed pregnant, that were delivered to us in March of 2023. And we were doing it with a 50-50 lamb share. So sort of a crop share, but with lambs, with the owner of those ewes. So we did not buy those ewes up front. We would just split split the lamb crop with the owner of those sheep. We're now up over 400 ewes, and we've kind of crossed the tipping point to where we own more of the ewes outright than we started with. It's kind of a big deal for us. It feels really good. And we're tentatively planning to return those original ewes in March of 2027. So our deal was we got them pregnant they arrived pregnant in 2023 in March. They've got to return pregnant when we return them to him. So there is a winter coming up where we have to feed them all through the winter just to send them back pregnant. But overall, we are just amazed with these sheep. It probably helps that we started with goats, which are super challenging in so many ways. Lots of fun, but really challenging. Comparatively, these sheep just knock our socks off. They're good mothers. They require very little intervention, and we're just very pleased with them. We're also real pleased with the market for sheep lately. So we'll talk about that a little bit too. I don't want to dive into this too deep because I don't know how many folks are interested in the details of our lamb share arrangements, but essentially we're just splitting the lamb crop straight up, and we'll market. We can either deliver the lambs back to the original owner, or we can take them to market just like we would take ours and split the proceeds from the sale. So a few other provisions in there, but I don't want to get too deep in the contract. I'm happy to answer questions about that arrangement if you like, if you have them. So we have a pasture in Hardin County. It's like pushing an hour away from us, so 45 minutes away. This land is actually owned by a Goats on the Go client, so it's somebody we had been doing weed and brush control for years and getting paid by them. And then when we wanted to start doing this, we just knew that we had a like-minded landlord potentially with these folks. And so we reached out to them and said, hey, do you have any properties that are just, you're planting corn and beans on them, but they're just really marginal? And we came up with this property of theirs. It's about 40 acres. The CSR on this property is 43 to 60 with a 55 average. It's not good ground. It's not good land at all. It only had corn and beans on it because it could have corn and beans on it. So it was flat and open, slightly rolling, variable, but generally poor soils. It did have these two barns, nice big old barns, that we were able to use. So that's pretty cool. Those have proven to be quite useful for us. And the landlord was excited about this idea. And so they, on their own volition, installed brand new woven wire fencing around this 40 acres, which is a big deal for us because we are a 45-minute drive away in an emergency. So knowing that we had kind of impenetrable perimeter fence was a big deal. If it was closer to home, we probably would have tried to get away with a lot lower quality fence, but the property owner was willing to do it, and that's really made it work for us. The property had a well on it and a very large buried cistern. That helped a lot because there's no electricity to the site. So the property owner installed solar panels to run a pump to fill the cistern whenever the sunlight was adequate. So we have the cistern for reserve, and then it's topping itself off whenever we have good sun. That has worked out actually surprisingly well, and we're really pleased with that. So that's how we water the animals at that site. That cistern, I don't know if you can see my pointer here or not. I'm sure there's a way I could turn that into a highlighter. But the cistern is down here in the southwest corner of the property. And we have a frost-free water that we installed as well. Energy-free, frost-free water. So that's our winter source of water. Our Story County pasture is about 68 acres. We kind of took it over progressively and took over the last bit of it last year. And we're going to add even more of this property owner's land in 2027. We have a 10-year lease on that. Really variable soils, but overall quite a bit better than our Hardin County pasture. So an 87 CSR average on that. It's open. It's rolling. It has prairie strips. Some of you may be familiar with prairie strips. This was one of the first test locations for the prairie strip concept coming out of Iowa State. So you can see those in the lower right corner. If you look close, these kind of bent strips of lighter color here, and then two large waterways running through the site. So the waterways actually run right through the strips. The landowner is really fond of these prairie strips, and so it was part of our lease that we would maintain those. We would graze rotationally right through them, but we would try to preserve those strips on site. Up on the north end here is the farmstead, and the property owner provided the materials for us to build a large loafing shed. It's just a very shallow but very wide loafing shed facing south. And so it's basically a glorified windbreak. We also installed at our cost another one of those frost-free waters up here in the barnyard. And then they have a well that also serves the house that we're able to access for water for the sheep. I'm making these lists for you just to know, so you know kind of what assets we went into this with and what benefits we started with, what things we had to provide and what things the property owners provided. In both these cases, very innovative, like-minded, forward-thinking property owners, and they were excited about putting livestock on their land. And I can't overstate how important that was as we started this venture. And this is only about 10 minutes from home, so this is a big deal for us. Honestly, the Hardin County site, it's hard to make that profitable when you have to drive 45 minutes just to reach it. But it got our foot in the door, and now we're building a relationship with this landowner as well, much closer to home.
Um, just a quick question on
Yeah,
that, or maybe a clarification. Like, I think it's interesting when you look at those pictures, that your aerial satellite images there, that you keep calling them pastures, but it's obvious that they are it's row crop ground that you turned into a pasture. Uh,
correct. Yep. I guess our mindset is pasture, but
yeah,
absolutely, they started as row crop fields, corn and beans. For the most part. My next slide will show you something
yeah.
different. But yeah, and so it required a full conversion of that land and seeding of that property, of both properties, to turn them into pastures. Yep, good point. I think of them as pastures because we planted perennials there to be in place for the long haul. And we may change our approach to that. More on that here in a bit. I reached out to the Story County landowner after I saw these signs, Practical Farmers of Iowa, and I'm a Practical Farmers member, and so I thought, well, boy, this guy might be interested in something different. And behind these signs at the time was this strange crop I'd never seen before that was green at the wrong time of year, and it was a canola crop. And so that just made me double down on the thinking I've got to send this guy a letter. So not having any other way to contact him, I looked up his tax address and sent him a letter in the old-fashioned mail. And sure enough, got a response pretty quickly because they were just starting to think, how do we do things differently? What do we do with this land? The property owners had just purchased the family farm after the passing of their parents. And so it was we caught them at a good time. So in both properties, we planted this forage mix. It is very heavy on legumes, maybe too heavy. One of our frustrations has been that it's primarily alfalfa, and we've had trouble getting the grasses established. Part of that is just poor timing. We started this with 2 years straight of bad drought, and the alfalfa is about the only thing that grew. Now we are seeing, you can see in this photo, we've got some better grass establishment there, and there are parts of our pastures that are doing better than others in terms of diversity and kind of the grasses spreading out. But yeah, we'll see how that goes over time here with better years of better moisture. It did cost us just for the seed $94 an acre for that mix. We have tried both broadcasting and rolling it, and also, after doing tillage, and then we've also tried drilled, both with and without a companion crop. I think one of the benefits we see of doing this, especially with a perennial mix, is that you put it in and you leave it in, and we are building organic matter, and we're not wild about the idea of using tillage to break it up and kind of reverse the progress we made. But for the beginning conversion, we've had much better luck with broadcasting our pasture mix on top of tilled ground as opposed to drilling it. All right, so at one point I started to second guess this whole plan, and I was riding along with my business partner and lamenting how much we were paying for rent. And my business partner is always a glasses half full kind of guy. He's excited about the next thing. He always is, you know, I'm the one usually reining him in being the pessimist. And I was complaining about what we pay for rent, and he said, "Aaron, it's one more ewe per acre. Like, as opposed to that river bottom pasture at one time that we thought we wanted versus corn ground converted to pasture, we only have to produce enough extra forage to produce one more lamb per acre." All right, so that raised my spirits a little bit, but if you know my business partner, he tends to be the most optimistic all the time, running the most optimistic numbers as roughly as possible through his head when he says stuff like that. So I went back and checked, and I assigned some actual numbers to this. And he's sort of right. If we can do one additional ewe per acre than we could on, really low quality pasture land, we would produce $140 extra per acre at 100 if we can manage a 140% lambing rate and 50 pounds of weight per lamb and get $2 per pound at market. And that's super conservative. What if we could get $2.50 a pound? That's $175 an acre extra. What if we get $3 per pound? That's $210 extra. $280 under this year's conditions, where we're getting nearly $4 a pound for good looking lambs at 50 to 60 pounds. And that's just figuring the slaughter value. If lambs are going for $4 a pound, what do ewe lambs sold for breeding bring? I didn't even put that into my calculation. So he was right for the most part. And there's a lot of reason to be optimistic, because it's conceivable. I mean, it's being conservative to say one extra ewe per acre on this kind of land as opposed to river bottom pasture in Iowa. So I tried to chart that here, and I'm going to dwell on this chart just a little bit if you'll humor me, because I think it's pretty important. Each of those lines represents a market condition. So the blue one is the most conservative, and it makes these assumptions up here in the upper right corner. And I think these are really realistic assumptions, that we're going to get a 140% weaning rate. That means 1.4 lambs for every ewe that we have out there. And we're going to get them to 50 pounds. And then we're going to go get $2 a pound at market. That's what the blue line represents. The red line represents $2.50 a pound, then $3.25 a pound, then $4 a pound. So we kind of have a best and worst case scenario here. But if we just focus on the blue line, the most conservative scenario, that's the line at which 30% of our revenue is spent on land. Our land cost equals 30% of our revenue. So another way to say this is, if I pay $80 an acre for river bottom pasture and I'm producing 2 ewes, or I can run 2 ewes per acre on it, I'm doing no worse if I'm paying $180 per acre, but I can run 4 ewes on it. And if I have to pay $250 per acre, I need to run 6 ewes on it to have the same land cost relative to my production as the guy who's running that river bottom pasture but can only run 2 ewes per acre. I hope that sort of makes sense. This is really comforting to me, because I think that blue line is super achievable, easily achievable. And the red and yellow lines, I think, are realistic. And the green line, I'll take it as long as I can get it. All right, so how many lambs does it take if weaning rates go up and lamb weights also go up? Because in that previous scenario, we're just talking about the number of ewes we can run on the given piece of land. But on this one, we're saying, well, what if we could also increase the weaning rates because of this type of pasture and its benefits? And we can also increase the lamb weights because of the benefits of this type of pasture. Well, one additional ewe per acre produces $165 extra if we can get to 150% weaning rate instead of 140. And if we can get to 55 pounds of at market weight instead of 50 at $2 a pound, that's 165 extra dollars per acre. Well, what if we could get to 250 a pound? That's over $200 per acre. We get up to $330 per acre extra if we can just get 150% weaning rate and 55 pounds because of the extra benefits of a converted pasture as opposed to that traditional Iowa river bottom pasture. There are also other benefits that aren't so obvious that we started to see as we implemented this. And as we've kind of settled into our system, we're seeing all sorts of other benefits. We get to customize the forage mix. This isn't just the fescue that happens to be growing in that river bottom pasture or the smooth brome that happens to be growing there. We get to pick it and plant it based on what we want. We get better breed back and more twins. We get better milk production. We have fewer predator issues. That's not so obvious at first, but if you think about where predators live relative to where we're growing sheep, I like being out in an open, relatively flat piece of crop ground as opposed to a river bottom or adjacent to that ravine or the creek that runs through. There's a lot fewer places for predators to hide. That gives our livestock guardian dogs, like the one you see here in this picture, clear sight lines. Easy to protect the animals. He just moves them to a hill at nighttime, just up to the top of a rise so he can see everything. We love that. There's also huge cost savers here. We have less land to manage per head because if we're putting 5 or 6 ewes per acre out there as opposed to 2 to the acre, in order to have the same productivity at 2 to the acre, we have to have a lot more land. That means more dogs and more fencing. So we have fewer dogs, less fence, less of everything because we're kind of concentrating the productivity on a smaller number of acres. It's easy to fence, both permanent fence and temporary fence, because we're not going through woods or up and down steep hills or across creeks. No creek crossings, so we don't have any flood risk. We don't have any fences getting washed out in heavy rains. We don't have trees falling on fences. It's easy to hay. It's either easy to gather up the sheep when we have to work them. It's easy to drive out there with a truck and feed hay on pasture during the winter. So some huge benefits that, are hard to put numbers to. But there's some challenges to the conversion cost. We probably way underestimated the conversion cost. Remember, we don't have tractors. We don't have tillage equipment. We've got nothing. So we've got to hire somebody to do everything. And then you've got the seed cost. And on top of that, it's that year lost to establishment. We might get a little hay in the first year of establishment, but we're not going to really run any sheep on it. And that's costly. And I think we underestimated that. There's limited shade out here in the open. We have not had too much trouble with that. We do have some shady spots in our pasture, and we can always run our sheep up into the barnyard and feed them hay. And so our practice so far has been, if we get in, several days up into the mid 90s, we are going to bring those sheep up into shade, maybe sacrifice a little bit of pasture that will get pounded a little bit, and we're going to feed some hay if we have to. But then we're going to move them right back into the rotation and move the animals across the land, which again makes it hard for us to provide shade on a daily basis. We've got no surface water to take advantage of, no ponds, no creeks, anything like that. And when we're out here in row crop land along, with a road every mile in the middle of Iowa, we're highly visible. And there's a lot of talk about our sheep. And there's a lot of people who think that we're crazy. And that's okay because we're not traditional farmers. We didn't grow up in the coffee shop or hearing the pressures that our parent farmers had to put up with from living in a community of farmers who have a certain way of doing things. So we're okay doing things differently, but it is a factor. Our sheep do draw attention, and not everybody loves the fact that we are running them on corn ground. All right. I gotta speed things up here, but I do want to mention that we do highly managed rotational grazing for our sheep, and we do want to improve the amount of forage, and we do want to improve soil life and soil quality But our first big thing is parasite management. So sheep and goats have issues with internal parasites, in particular the barber pole worm. That's the biggest one that's an issue. We do not want to have to give chemical dewormers to our sheep any more than is absolutely necessary. So our sheep are constantly moving. They can stay in one grazing cell for up to 3 days, and then they have to move. And they have to be off of that piece of land, off of that spot for at least 42 days. Best of it's a little bit hazy, the research out there, but based on our best understanding of the research, we have a good chance of breaking up that parasite cycle if we stick to our 3 day and 42-day rule. What that means is that by the time we return to a particular spot, it's sat there for 6 weeks growing. The vegetation is always more mature than we'd like it, almost always. We can manage that to some extent by cutting some hay ahead of and behind the rotation to keep it in a good vegetative state. But again, we don't have haying equipment. We have to hire all of that done. We would much rather graze it. And so we have to adjust the speed of our rotations according to the conditions on the ground, while still obeying our 3-day, 42-day rule. This is just a picture of the grazing map that we use. This is kind of what actually happened in our first pass. What year was this? In 2024. So we've got 1.25 acre enclosures that we do with electric netting. And you can see in this one with the white arrow crossing it, this is where we started lambing. And so we're adjusting our paddock sizes according to the number of animals on the ground and how much space they need to make sure that they don't have too much trouble with mismothering. So oftentimes we're breaking our rule a little bit about the 3 days because we don't back fence immediately behind them when we move them, because there's always ewes scattered around with newborn lambs, and we don't want to interfere with that. So we give them a couple of extra days to move on to the new piece of ground, and then we'll bring the back fence up behind them. I'm going to fast forward a little bit just so I cover a little more ground. I want you to see some pictures here of what this looks like. So this is spring, our first move out into the pasture after the winter, and you can see this forage is amazing. You can barely see the backs and heads of these sheep. So in the spring, it's like you can't rotate fast enough, and then in the late summer, you're trying to pull back on the reins and get every little bit of forage you can because things have started to slow down. You can see our electric fences there. I think every bit of our equipment is somewhere in this presentation. So our fences, you can see we do have an old Honda four-wheeler back there, and we have a mineral tub on a little sled that gets towed around from grazing cell to grazing cell. Here you can see in the foreground, they're probably on day 2 of eating this grazing cell. And back behind them, you can see where we're going next and see the difference in the forage. Same here, they just came off of what's in the foreground and moved into the paddock toward the top of the image. This is how we do water. Just this 3 IBC totes. We've got a pump, gasoline-powered pump on a hay rack, and we suck water out of that cistern or fill it up at a well and then take it out to the sheep and just gravity flow it from the tanks into the drinking tank that's on the ground. This has worked out really well for us, except we'd like to reduce the amount of driving we do over the pasture with a heavy wagon like this and a truck to pull it. Those are our 2 livestock guardian dogs there, catching some shade underneath the wagon. The dogs are the main concern with shade. The sheep just tolerate the heat really well, but the dogs do need shade. So we have a dog feeder for them. Let me skip that one. We have a dog feeder for them that has a little bit of a roof on it, so they can get under some shade there too. Just switching over to winter. This is our Cobit waterer. It's energy free, but energy free doesn't work that well. We never have to worry about the plumbing freezing underneath, but we do get some ice on the surface. The sheep are kind of amazing. I mean, we always try to break up that ice at least once a day when it's super cold, but they just start licking at the edges, and pretty soon they've opened up a little hole, or it tips that cap of ice over and allows that warm water to flow up underneath on top. And before you know it, it's open, especially if we can get a little bit of sun. The sheep really drink together, and sometimes I think they don't even drink daily. So it's not even so much a consideration of how many head you have drinking off the same water. It's just that they drink so intermittently that they can't keep it open like cattle might in a feedlot environment. So some winter pictures here. The guy that we have our lamb share deal with, one of the things he said that made me chuckle is that these ewes just seem to get fat on air. And he's totally right. Once they're not nursing anymore, they just put condition on stuff that doesn't look like it has any nutrition in it at all. And we're just really pleased. We don't have to supplement these sheep hardly at all. The ewe lambs that we keep for replacements, they do need some supplementation. They can't convert this stuff quite as well, but this is just stockpiled forage that, so it's the stuff we eat every day through the summer. It's alfalfa and some orchard grass and timothy and that sort of thing, but freeze dried going into the winter. It gives you a good picture of what our pasture looks like. We do make some hay, like I mentioned, to stay ahead of the maturity of the vegetation, and to use in wintertime. And we typically just store those off to the sides of the pasture, because as long as there's any good nutrition at all in that stockpiled forage, the sheep will not eat these bales. But if you have a few days of really high wind and cold weather and they come up into the barnyard for a windbreak, they do get a little lazy and they start picking at the hay bales. You can see sunlight right through these. I mentioned that we experimented with bale grazing. We do like bale grazing. In our case, in the late fall, we just hire somebody to come and set a bunch of bales out for us because we don't have a tractor with a bale spear close to our pastures. So we have it all planned out. We set out bales and then we fence those bales off. We got tired of fencing in the winter pretty fast, and we realized that if we just left netting on the bales, the sheep would not touch the bales with net on them until all the bales with the net removed had been pretty much eaten up. And then they'd start picking at those bales. So we could just go out every few days and take the wrap off of a few more bales rather than fencing. And that, it wasn't a perfect system, but it saved us a lot of labor. And at this site that is 45 minutes away, that really helped us out. Here's some of the sheep eating those bales that we'd set out. And we try to set them out on the low productivity parts of the pasture. So this is a hilltop. We have even tried this with large square bales. And we just cut all the twines off except for that top one. And it kind of keeps it from getting destroyed so fast. But honestly, we found that the sheep do such a good job of eating down through that mat of the bottom of a hay bale that that's probably unnecessary. A challenge with the large square bales like this set on end is that you can't put a lot of them out very far ahead of the winter because they'll wick moisture up from the bottom pretty easily or get ruined by rain and moisture. So but it was an interesting experiment that we'd be interested in doing more with in the future, but it's going to require more ready access to equipment to do that. A couple of pictures after the winter of bale grazing, so you can sort of see where this bale was set, and you can see some bare spots in there, but this vegetation is coming back nicely after right through that mat of wasted hay. And you can also see, if you look close, that we've got excellent growth out around the edges of where that bale was grazed. Probably enough to more than make up for a few bare spots that are still recovering from the winter. But there are some other spots that, for whatever reason, the sheep didn't eat it as completely, and we do get some weed growth in there. But the sheep just eat the weeds too. because of how we have them concentrated in those grazing cells. They have to eat pretty much what's right ahead of them. But you do get some spots like this where the growth was slow to come back, the mat was too thick, and it did smother some stuff out. But again, if you look at how dense and thick and dark green the vegetation is all around it, I think that comes pretty close to making up for what we smothered out. And then by year 2, this looks completely back to normal and better than it did before. Nonetheless, one of the pieces of equipment that we did break down and buy is a hydraulic bale bed for one of our trucks. This has some really big advantages for us. We can hire somebody to make hay for us and just leave those bales in the pasture, and we can go pick them up and move them where we want to. Then in the winter, we can roll out hay into these big, long strips. You can kind of see the sheep there in the background eating. Everybody gets a bite. Everybody gets what they need. We don't have to put out extra bales just to make sure everybody can get around them. We can use exactly the number of bales that we think they need for 2-3 days and roll them out all at once. And we have confidence that everybody's going to get the hay that they need. It also allows us to be a little more precise with that residue from wasted hay. We can put it right where we want it. We can keep rolling out in the same spots over and over. We can spread it out. And we get to look more like this. We kind of sacrificed this paddock here by rolling out hay on it over and over and over again. But this is just like a week after being off of it. And that vegetation is growing back nicely because there aren't those dense mats of hay. I could talk at length about guardian dogs, but I'm almost out of time. So I'm going to just say we do have predator problems. Not huge, and it took a while for them to develop, but most people who run sheep on pasture will eventually have a predator problem. So I do think dogs are an eventual necessity. There's that dog feeder I mentioned. The dogs can jump through this gate here, but the sheep won't get through that gate. A little bit of tin on top to provide some shade, and that's on a sled that we could just pull around through the grazing rotations. We do have herding dogs too. That's a whole other story, but I'm happy to answer questions about it. All right, lessons learned, and then we'll wrap up here. So we took on too many experiments at once. There was the row crop conversion experiment. There was the paying a high lease rate experiment. There was the planting a forage mix from scratch experiment. There was the we hardly have any experience with sheep at all, and now 200 have arrived experiment. So just too many things going on at once. The lamb share itself was a gigantic experiment, and so probably I would have eased into it a little more if I were starting over. But now we got the system up and going, and we're pretty happy with it. We underestimated the costs of pasture establishment. We need a greater variety of pasture types and seasonal forages. If you're going to spend a lot of money on pasture seed, you want to maintain that pasture. And in late winter or about this time of year, we need a place to put sheep off of this planted pasture while this is all regrowing. And we don't have any like just grass, river bottom pasture or, just traditional pasture to put them on. It'd be nice to have a small piece of that to supplement our converted pastures. Not having equipment and debt is awfully freeing, but custom hiring has its challenges. We were doing a crop share on our hay for a couple of years, and boy, the hay guys loved that. And then last year there was more hay than anybody could find something to do with, and the prices dropped, and all of a sudden everybody backed out of our hay share arrangements. So we love feeding out hay on pasture. It's just the way to go. It's just been great, especially with that bale truck. These sheep don't need much intervention. They don't need us hanging over their heads during lambing. In fact, we try to stay away as much as possible because we're going to cause more problems than we solve. More to tell you there, but I'm going to skip to the bottom and just say, turns out not all corn ground is good land. Just because it was flat enough to plant corn and beans on doesn't mean it was very good land. And so you can kind of see in this image This is 3 years after planting, and you can still see the lines from where the seed was originally drilled in, and it's not filling in really well despite our best management. Are we profitable? Not yet, but we now are net positive value on our operation. We could sell out now and more than break even. In 2025, we were able to cash flow this thing, and neither one of us had to put in any more of our own personal money. We need to improve our twinning rates. We need to have fewer singles. We need to get better production out of our ewe lambs in the first year of breeding. That's going to be hard to do without record keeping, and record keeping is hard to do when you just lamb on pasture like we do, and try to stay out of the way. We can't run in and tag kids because we're going to mess up that relationship with their ewes. So we're still figuring some of that out, and we're going to be glad when our lamb crop arrangement is done, because we're just breaking even when we're handing 50% of the lamb crop back to the owner of those original ewes. Okay. I
Uh,
hope I left enough time for questions. Go ahead.
Absolutely. We'll just rapid fire you here,
Yeah.
some questions here. But the first question goes back to the bale grazing. Have you been able to accurately estimate the amount of bales to set out for the winter grazing when you were doing that? Now, this year you said you unrolled some. Is there a rule of thumb in that estimating, or does it just vary depending on the hay and the quality and
Yeah, it varies an awful lot. We can kind of watch what the ewes are consuming and know if we need to add more or cut it back a little bit. The quality of the hay does matter a lot. We think that we're probably getting 15 to 20% better utilization by rolling out than leaving it than doing the bale grazing. Of course, people who like bale grazing like to say, well, there's no such thing as waste because all of those nutrients are returning to the soil. That doesn't necessarily mean that that 5-inch mat is the right amount. I don't know that anybody knows the right amount of residue. So we've been experimenting with just rolling that hay out over and over on the same spots, trying to find the happy middle between wastage and having enough organic matter or nutrients left behind to make a difference.
awesome? This is a good question here. This when I saw you earlier this winter, this was a question that popped up as well, and I think you had an interesting answer. Have you experimented with other types of fencing, one, two, three strands of polywire, as opposed to the net fence?
Yeah, here again, starting with goats, like it just probably changed our perspective on everything. We learned to set up that net fencing in woods and brush and thorny thing, like miserable environment. So when we go out into the field and start thinking about how to fence it, it's a dream. Like we're so good at setting up that net fence that now we go and do it in the open. We just can't do anything faster. We've tried. We've tried polywires. Even if you've just got to do two, I just think it's more time consuming, at least for us. And, you know, I don't know that you can sound arrogant about setting up net fences, but I'm going to do my best. I just think we're so good at it that we don't think twice about it now. We can put up a paddock, like a 2-acre paddock, 100% net fences in like 30 minutes, and
How many
um,
uh, how many rolls of net fence is that?
so 2 acres is probably something like 7 rolls of fence, something like that. Yeah, I know it. I mean, a lot of people hate the net fencing, and I've had my moments, but it's just hard to hate it when you're out in the open on flat ground. So we just take the 4-wheeler, we drive right through that thick forage to establish the line where we're going to set the fence, and we just go.
Awesome. Again, keep putting questions in. We'll rip through as many of these questions as we can. So if you've got questions, I've got a couple questions. Thinking about an organic row crop farmer that maybe is not raising livestock currently, sees this as an option or an opportunity. First question is, what does your labor look like seasonally? How much per day, week? What would you call your labor
Yeah,
as that goes?
Right. So on days when we have to move the sheep to a new paddock, we're probably putting in an hour of labor.
Okay.
One person hour of labor. We don't tear down all of the paddock before on that day because we know we're going to leave the sheep in this new paddock for 3. So we set up on day 1. On day 2, we come back and we start taking down some of the fences and moving them to a new paddock on the front end. And then on day 3, we come back and finish that paddock and let the sheep into the new spot. And we just start the cycle over and over again. So we try to put in about an hour a day, and that because there's always something that needs done, and especially this allows us to look ahead to the weather too, and we'll put in a little extra time if we see that the weather's going to be bad. We don't want to be out there setting up fence in the rain. So
So with a couple hundred ewes, it's not like you're adding 4 hours a day to your labor.
correct. No, I would say about an hour a day, and it scales because as the herd gets bigger, the enclosures need to get bigger. But as you're enclosing more space, as the paddocks get bigger, the number of fence feet per acre gets smaller. Does that
Okay,
make sense?
sure. Yep, yep. What about your calendar when it comes to lambing, weaning, selling lambs? What does that look like? So I'm thinking about, you have 4 to 5 to 6 ewes per acre. How long are you also having all those lambs with them per
Mm-hmm.
acre?
Yeah. We usually start lambing around May 1st, and we'll be 90% done by the end of the month,
Okay.
probably.
So you lamb
Um,
in May.
yep. Yep. I mean, we don't want to add it. If we add labor to this thing by putting these lambs, lambing in January and putting these lambs all in these ewes all in their own jugs, we're just defeating the purpose of these sheep. These sheep are awesome at doing it themselves out on pasture. So we want to give them the best weather time to do that. Um, and we're not pushing really fast growth either on these lambs. We're not supplementing them all. The market's going to be best in winter, so we really don't need them to be gigantic in on September 1st.
Sure. Okay. What about weaning? What'd you say?
Yeah, so we've experimented with not castrating the ram lambs and weaning them off as early as 2 months,
Okay.
and we found that we're not very. That's not the way to go for us. We're bad at feeding lambs apparently, and so we're just going to let the ewes do it. So we've determined now that probably weaning at 4 to 5 months, it has a lot of advantages for us. We've
Yeah.
never had trouble with those ewes putting on condition and breeding back. So we're kind of taking the approach of late weaning.
And then selling in September, you said, or
We'll sell some if we need the cash flow, but otherwise we're going to try to keep them around until at least December, because you see it generally see a dramatic increase in prices at that point.
trying to hit your markets. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A couple more questions. Have you had any experience or know anybody experienced with running a flood, running cattle with your sheep and gaining some predator protection from the cattle?
Um, we don't have any experience with that. We've talked about buying a few steers here and there just to run kind of behind the sheep in a rotation behind the sheep, just for locker beef for friends and family and that sort of thing. But we don't have any experience with it ourselves. I'll tell you, I have run goats and sheep together, and they isolate themselves from each other so much that I would suspect that the cattle wouldn't have a huge impact on predators. I think, like, certainly not to the extent that you could replace dogs with cattle.
Sure.
The sheep are just going to segregate themselves from the cattle and make themselves easy targets. That's
Okay.
my opinion, my guess.
Yeah, yeah. About your pastures, you said that you have heavier legumes than you'd like. Do you find a better rate of gain with more energy dense grasses versus the protein heavy legumes, or is it more just a grazing structure, grazing seasonality question for
If
you?
for me, it's a seasonality and diversity issue in the
Okay.
forage mix. I don't know that we have enough data to say that the gain is better on this type of forage versus that type of forage. I mean, our lambs are growing fast on that alfalfa, but I just think that we'd have more resilient pastures if we had better diversity and we had a higher grass content.
Sure, sure. Well, awesome. Well, I do want to just take a second, kind of wrap up here, for sure. And I'm gonna actually, Aaron, can you throw your slide back up where people can find you? Sorry,
Sure.
uh, you should be able to just kick me out of
Yep.
sharing. There
No
we go.
problem.
But I do want to just say again that like the one of the reasons I thought bringing Aaron on would be a neat idea for the Iowa Organic Association. Obviously, we deal with organic in Iowa. We have quite a few acres of organic row crop production, corn, beans, small grains. But seeing this as an opportunity for a third crop, instead of maybe instead of growing a small grain, growing or in conjunction with growing a small grain, using planting a pasture for 2 or 3 years and using these sheep as a crop in part of the rotation. So you could utilize it in marginal areas of your farm, of course, but also as part of the rotation. Let's see, you started in 22? Is that what you said?
23.
23. Okay. How do you feel like you've seen your pastures, your land change in those 3 years now, coming up on 3 years?
Yeah. Well, I think we're not losing any of the legumes yet. I mean, I think we're just getting to the point where the grasses are actually starting to get really established. And in fact, I think kind of setting back the alfalfa in some spots was kind of a key to that. We did graze some spots heavier than others, and you can kind of see the grasses starting to come. So after 3 years, like it would seem it would seem a shame to till it under, but I totally get the benefits too of incorporating this into a rotation. We haven't done soil tests to see how things have changed yet down below. We are seeing like the bird life is off the charts immediately when it goes to any kind of a year-round forage like that. And yeah, and just general improvements in the wildlife, much less barren out there. We we would like we are starting to see a need for some annual forages that would increase our flexibility through the season and kind of give us a precursor to establishing the perennials. Like maybe we plant do a year or two of a series of annuals. And so I don't know how that would fit into a organic row crop producer's schedule, but we do see a lot of potential for that too. It may give us that diversity that we need.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Well, again, I wanted Aaron to put this slide up here again. It's got contact information and where you can find out a little bit about what got going on. Again, thank you so much, Aaron, for joining us and sharing about what you're doing with sheep there on sacred row crop ground in Story County.